In town, Paul searches for provisions when the alarms blare. Hastily, he dashes out, navigating the streets cautiously, evading danger and moving away from any signs of chaos. Amidst the shroud of black smoke enveloping the city, Paul finds refuge in a deserted dwelling on the outskirts, where he reunites with his offspring, whom he must single-handedly nurture. 15 years elapse, and Paul's sons mature into robust adolescents. They inhabit the same abode, venturing out during daylight hours for resources, while remaining concealed after nightfall. As dusk descends, Joseph secures the windows and summons their canine companion, Rocco, indoors. Paul lingers outside until Thomas returns, chiding him for his tardiness. Thomas elucidates that he was aiding the Rose family, neighbours, who own a farm. After making sure every door and window is locked, the three of them sit down for dinner. Paul once again scolds Thomas for being late, threatening to restrict his movements. Joseph teases his brother, leading to an argument that quickly turns physical. Paul intervenes, reminding them to act like men, not animals. Following dinner, Paul watches his sons play chess until Rocco's strange behaviour catches his attention. Sensing trouble, Paul and Thomas investigate downstairs, where they are startled by a sudden pounding on the door. The creatures outside try to force their way in, prompting Paul and Thomas to hold the door firmly shut. After a few intense moments of shaking and pounding, the creatures retreat. Thomas accuses Joseph of not helping, but Joseph reveals he was actually listening in order to gather more information. There were those 3 trials. The initial one lasted for 10 seconds, the second for 20, and the final one for just 1. Joseph suspects that the first was an experiment, and the second was the actual endeavour to breach, while the third was merely a frustrated strike. The following day, they inspect the entrance and observe all the claw marks on the timber. The entryway has weakened, so Paul and his sons venture out to search for timber to fortify it. They bring back all their discoveries to the abode, and while Thomas chops the wood, Paul checks on Joseph, who is constructing something in the barn. After some prodding from Paul, Joseph confesses he's been attempting to construct a vehicle because he's tired of feeling restricted and fearful. However, he can't make it function. Paul is impressed and takes a look, swiftly implementing a couple of alterations that finally make the automobile operational. Excited, Paul takes the adolescents on a journey to instruct them on driving. They return home after an hour of exploration, and Paul notes that the windows still require reinforcement, so he dispatches the boys to the river to salvage. Thomas becomes upset because he had been assured he could visit the farm today, but Paul insists that this task is more pressing. The siblings depart in the vehicle, and Thomas directs his frustration toward Joseph, accusing Paul of including him solely to shield his brother. Joseph dismisses the notion that he requires protection, prompting Thomas to exit the car as they pass by the farm, requesting Joseph to pick him up on the return journey. Back at the residence, Paul completes reinforcing the door and takes a solitary break to smoke beside the waterfall. While surveying the surroundings, he notices a dark, eerie cavity in the rocks. Meanwhile, Joseph ventures to the river, securing himself to the car before descending into an aged, abandoned vessel in search of provisions. Within a locker, he discovers a risque pin-up torn from a magazine, momentarily leaving him speechless. Upon further exploration, he is startled when a swarm of insects emerges from a pile of debris, buzzing around him in an attempt to make contact with his skin, prompting him to hastily vacate the area. At the farm, Thomas assists with the family's tasks, although it becomes apparent that his primary motive for being there is the owner's daughter, Charlotte. It's evident that the adolescents harbour feelings for each other as they embark on a stroll together through the field. Charlotte directs Thomas's attention to a rope fastened to a tree, recounting how, as a child, she would tether herself to the tree to extend her play area, while technically remaining connected. They engage in a game, exchanging fanciful theories about the cause of the apocalypse. As Thomas prepares to depart, Charlotte embraces him tightly. With the sun beginning to set, both boys realize they must hasten. Upon Paul's return home, he becomes anxious upon finding Rocco, but neither of his sons. Joseph returns to the car, initially encountering difficulty starting it, but eventually manages to get it running. Meanwhile, Thomas races as fast as he can and stumbles, tumbling into a crevice in the ground. When Joseph reaches the spot to collect his brother, he fails to locate him and continues onward. Upon arriving home and recounting the events to his father, Paul instructs him to secure the premises, while he and Rocco set out in search of Thomas. In the crevice, Thomas awakens with aching limbs. Using a lighter for illumination, he surveys the surroundings and is startled to observe a creature extending its appendage through a fissure in the wall. The creature emits a piercing screech, audible to Paul and Rocco. Proceeding cautiously, Thomas retrieves a small knife and pierces the creature's hand, causing it to retract into the crevice. However, as Thomas steps back, another creature emerges from above and seizes his face, impeding his breathing. Before losing consciousness, Paul arrives and swiftly dispatches the assailant. After confirming Thomas's well-being, Paul and Rocco locate a passageway leading to the crevice. Recognizing the peril of traversing the forest at night, they opt to remain in the crevice until daybreak, fortifying the entrance for protection. Despite preparing a flare for defense against the advancing creatures, their plans are disrupted by tremors, signaling the creatures' subterranean movement, sealing off the exit with soil. As Rocco continues to bark and the crevice trembles incessantly, Paul instructs his son and the dog to retreat while he ignites the flare within the opening fissure. When the creatures attempt to breach, Paul triggers a controlled explosion, inadvertently injuring himself in the process. Back at the house, Joseph hears ominous creaking noises and formulates a plan. Minutes later, he positions himself before the main door, tethered to his chair with a rope, and drifts off into slumber. Soon, a creature moves the timber, barricading an orifice in the door, and extends its appendage, elongating its nail, to assess if Joseph is genuinely asleep. Observing no reaction from the boy, the creature ventures inside, only for Joseph to unveil his ruse and tug the rope. Instantly, a cage descends from the ceiling, ensnaring the creature. Satisfied with his ingenuity, Joseph shrouds the cage with a blanket and retires for the night. The following morning, he grows concerned as the others fail to return, prompting him to embark on a search in the car. Meanwhile, Thomas excavates through the displaced earth to reopen the passage and hauls his gravely injured father to safety. Rocco emerges as well, trailing the sound of the car to locate Joseph and guide him back to his kin. The brothers collaborate to transport Paul to the car and subsequently to his bed in the house. While deliberating their next steps, Thomas notices the concealed cage and peeks beneath the blanket, prompting the creature inside to thrash about. Joseph hastily conceals the creature once more, elucidating that light is detrimental to the monsters. They attend to Paul's injuries as Joseph recounts that the creature breached the defenses in a mere 8 seconds the previous night, the swiftest incursion to date. He suspects a second creature that retreated. Concerned by the creature's evolving behavior, Joseph surmises that something is amiss. Thomas suggests that the creatures are intelligent, speculating that their nocturnal attack was in retribution for the previous night's casualties in the cave, as Charlotte mentioned their infrequent visits to the farm. Joseph refutes the notion that they slew the creatures, attributing the death solely to Paul. To vindicate his father, Thomas endeavors to dispatch the creature in the cage. Joseph attempts to thwart him, desiring to study the creature, but in the struggle, the monster breaks free and skitters under the bed. When it cautiously emerges, Rocco's barks provoke it to transform and attack. Joseph hastens to restrain it, while Thomas swiftly decapitates it with an axe. Persisting in his pursuit of knowledge, Joseph transports the carcass to the barn and commences dissection, observed by Rocco and a swarm of insects. Despite extensive dissection, he remains perplexed by its nature. Thomas proposes relocating Paul to the Rose family's farm, citing their superior accommodations and medical resources. Skeptical of the Rose's willingness to assist, Joseph is coerced into compliance by Thomas. They load Paul into the car and drive to the farm, only to find Joseph's suspicions confirmed. The Roses lack the necessary medicine and decline to admit a severely injured individual. Charlotte's objections fall on deaf ears, yet her parents consent to Thomas staying, potentially providing Paul and Joseph with more resources. Ignoring Thomas's attempts to reconcile, Joseph berates him for their father's impending demise. Enraged, Thomas shoves his brother to the ground and begins choking him, only to relent upon realizing his actions. Joseph hastily departs with his unconscious father, leaving Thomas to join the Rose family at their farm. Later, Charlotte and Thomas share a tender moment and share a kiss, only to be interrupted by Charlotte's father, who relegates his daughter to another room. Meanwhile, Joseph observes the sheep fleeing in terror and perceives mounds of displaced earth, indicative of subterranean movement by the creatures. Upon returning home, he notices a trail of dirt near the wall, fueling his concern that the monsters may be lurking beneath the house. After attending to his father, Joseph fortifies the house, barricading windows and collecting supplies to devise a new strategy. While maneuvering through the house, he inadvertently falls through a carpet, revealing a hidden hole underneath, confirming his fears that the creatures have infiltrated the building. At the farm, Charlotte discovers Thomas rummaging through the kitchen, still fretful about his father and seeking medicine to aid him. Charlotte provides the medicine, and Thomas expresses gratitude with a hug, pledging to return, oblivious to potential eavesdroppers. As Thomas rushes out, he encounters a farmhand, brandishing a gun, accusing him of theft, despite Thomas's insistence that Charlotte provided the medicine. Disbelieving, the employees apprehend Thomas and transport him to the barn, where they bind him and drown out his protest with music. Preparing to execute Thomas, they seize his legs. But before they can act, a hole materializes beneath one of the assailants, causing him to plummet and thwarting the shot. Meanwhile, in the main house, Charlotte's parents awaken to a disturbance and investigate with a candle. only for a creature to ambush them. The candle ignites a conflagration as the creature assaults the father, prompting the mother's flight, only to fall victim to the creature's attack. The creature convulses before assuming another form and regurgitates over the woman before attacking. Charlotte, in her bedroom, overhears the gruesome demise of both her parents. Emerging from her room, she is horrified to discover a trail of blood, which she follows to the bathroom, where she finds the creature with her mother's lifeless body on its back. Meanwhile, in the barn, the men futilely attempt to fend off the creatures. Despite their efforts, they are systematically slaughtered, with the survivors pursued relentlessly as more creatures arrive. The barn erupts in flames, and Thomas, managing to topple the furniture he's bound to, breaks free. Just as a creature closes in on him, it is gunned down by Charlotte. The teens escape, with Thomas witnessing the inferno engulfing the house. Charlotte reveals her parents' fate, and they agree to seek refuge at Thomas's home. Meanwhile, Joseph barricades the hole in the door with furniture, tending to his unconscious father before preparing for battle. When the door opens again, it's Thomas and Charlotte, prompting Joseph to acknowledge his need for Thomas's assistance. Their discussion is interrupted by Paul, awakening, who promptly takes his medication and urges his sons to continue the fight. Joseph outlines his strategy, and they gather gasoline cans from the barn as Rocco continues to bark warnings. They also relocate an old freezer into the house. Thomas and Charlotte start reinforcing every remaining window, while Joseph constructs a pile of furniture and douses it with gasoline, adding every available explosive object and one of his father's cigarettes, which slowly burns down. Joseph prepares a makeshift bomb. Suddenly the pile covering the hole begins to shake as a creature descends the chimney into Paul's room. Another monster emerges from the hole, but Thomas ambushes it from behind, stabbing it in the head and killing it. Meanwhile, a third creature targets Charlotte, but she swiftly eliminates it with her firearm. The duo rushes to rejoin Joseph, and together they move the freezer. However, the door behind them opens, revealing Paul, now awake and bloodied from slaying the chimney monster. Taking Charlotte's gun, Paul shoots at the floor to fend off the creatures below. As the horde advances, Paul kicks the first one, causing a tremor that sends most of the creatures plummeting them through the weakened floor. A few monsters manage to evade the initial onslaught, but the teens swiftly dispatch them before they can harm Paul, who admires the trio's teamwork. Afterwards, the three teens and Rocco rush to the freezer for safety. Opting to stay behind, Paul closes the door to buy them time. Inside the freezer, the group seeks refuge as Paul reminisces about holding his babies tightly, assuring them that everything would be all right. Another horde of creatures bursts in, and Paul valiantly distracts them until the furniture bomb finally detonates, causing the house to collapse and ignite. The freezer tumbles uncontrollably for several minutes before coming to a stop. Emerging from the wreckage, the teens frantically search for Paul, only to be confronted by a creature leaping out unexpectedly. Racing to the car, they drive away as the flaming monster pursues them. Charlotte's bullets prove ineffective, so she strikes it with her gun, causing it to disintegrate. Several miles later, they halt the car and gaze at the stars, a sight they had missed during their nocturnal confinement. The following morning, they return to the ruins of their former home, deciding against rebuilding in the same location. Gathering whatever supplies they can salvage, they bury their loved ones and bid them farewell. Subsequently, the three teens and Rocco depart in the car, hopeful of finding a new abode in the farms down the valley.